Welcome back. And I just want to say that anybody, if you're speaking using the microphone, please do. But also, it helps for the video because we're not catching all of the comments and that people are making. So just a reminder to use the microphones. Thank you. So welcome to our second panel. And we have three interesting speakers here to talk more about collaborating with others. And so our first speaker is a colleague of mine and friend of mine, Ludwig Bstieler from the University of New Hampshire. And he is an associate professor in the business school there, and he's in the marketing department. But Ludwig and I have known each other a long time now, and we always get to see each other at conferences, which is always fun, even though we don't live that far away. Our second speaker is David Lazar, who is an associate professor here at Northeastern University. He has a joint appointment in the Department of Political Science and the College of Computer and Information Science, and he is a director of the program on networked governance at Harvard. And David, it's a pleasure to meet you because I've heard a lot about you. And then finally, our third speaker is Tim Thomas, who is the CIO for Local Motors, which Amy talked a little bit about this morning, but I'm sure this afternoon we'll hear a lot more about Local Motors. I also find them a very interesting company in terms of how they got started and their business model, and it's an interesting story. So please welcome all of our speakers, and Ludwig will start off.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Gloria, also for inviting me to this interesting day-long conference. I'm with the marketing department, as you heard. And so what Eric van Hippel said about user innovation is very dear to my heart. Still, my research is in a slightly different field. My research is actually, or has been over the past several years, in the field of buyer-supplier collaborations for new product development. That is the involvement of customers, commercial customers that is, or business-to-business customers that is, into the product development process. That probably led to an invitation by some German colleagues that realized that there was a funding opportunity that was proposed by the Volkswagen Foundation, the philanthropic arm of the car company, that was money available for research into university industry research collaborations, and that was based on the recognition in Europe, not only in Germany but also in Europe, that many of those industry university collaborations do not perform as they're expected to perform. And more recently, if you look at NSF reports, what they state is that many, if not most, of the collaborations between universities and companies do not expect as they perform. The Volkswagen Foundation has not centuries, decades of experience in funding those types of research projects, and they sifted their internal records, and what they realized was that university industry collaborations do not perform as expected. Yet, if you look at the data here, the latest data that I retrieved from the NSF website yesterday was most of the basic research in the US is being conducted at universities. A total of $57 billion is spent on R&D. This is our money. This is public money that's being spent. So the public, of course, has a right to us to demand what happened to that money. What's the outcome? And if it's true that those research collaborations between universities and industry, in fact, are not performing as well, why is it that they don't? And what can be done to facilitate better outcomes? And so this was basically the start of us writing a proposal that the Volkswagen Foundation then accepted. Of course, they cut our funding demands in half. They found it excessive. We didn't, but they did. And so we ultimately ended up with studying those collaborations in 4 countries. In Germany, one colleague moved to South Korea. He's working now at the University of Korea in Seoul. So we have data from Seoul. We have data from Japan. Another colleague studied in Germany, actually, and has been holding a position at a Tokyo University for many years, and has signed up as the 3rd collaborator, and I am basically the principal investigator for the US. And so this was basically the start of my involvement. When you think of university-industry collaborations, what you face is a divide between a discovery, let me put it this differently, ideally a discovery-driven culture at the university. We're all into research. If you talk to most of the universities, what is important to you, most of the universities will say it's the research. And the incentive system is such that if you produce output in the form of publications, if you get a lot of citations or patents, this is the way you will be promoted and tenured. So the incentive structure, the incentive system basically drives that research interest. On the other hand, in a university-industry collaboration, the collaborators, the university meets an innovation-driven environment. Companies have a very different bottom line than universities. And the major interest of industry is to commercialize technology, to develop products that the market actually wants, and to become very profitable and pay back their stakeholders. And so when you look at the latest data, 14% of the total spending in research and development, and that includes basic research, applied research, and development, is conducted at the universities. Universities have been granted roughly 4,400 patents in 2009. Patents, as you know, don't necessarily mean a commercialized product that is successful. So that is quite a remarkable number, yet it, of course, pales in comparison in terms of overall spending to industry spending, but not when it comes to basic research and development. This is sort of the next generation, or the generation beyond that, that are to deliver the platforms for future products. And so it's not really a surprise when we accept the fact that much of the talent, expertise, and the resources dedicated to research are located within those universities, and that they act as a lure to major companies, small and large companies, domestic companies as well as international companies. All of you can come up with examples of collaborations between, just say, local area schools here and colleges and domestic and international ones. So this is the announcement that Pfizer, or the next day, that Pfizer was going to invest $100 million over a 5-year period into less than a handful of local area schools that would, from now on, help with therapeutic research. Because Pfizer has decided, well, we are not going, as the prior speaker said, Eric, many of those pharmaceutical companies don't do the research anymore. And in fact, we have, across industries, we have seen a downsizing of R&D, basic R&D activities with many companies. We have seen outsourcing of R&D of the research and development overseas. And so if you think about outsourcing of manufacturing and what happened to that, in terms of the competitiveness of countries, you might remember Pisano's article in the Harvard Business Review, where he painted a very negative picture about the competitiveness of different industries. If you sort of correlate that with, correlate that or relate that to what would happen if you outsourced R&D to other countries, what that would mean for the competitiveness of this or any other of those countries. So Pfizer is one of those large pharmaceuticals. We know that Sanofi is another one that has a vested interest here in Boston. We know that Novartis has moved its world research headquarters to Cambridge, and in the first day announced that within 1 year they would hire 1,000 scientists 1,000 scientists, highly paid, best paid people in the area. Why would they come here? Well, because that's the same question, why did you rob the bank? Same thing, so it's very obvious. And to give you another example, IBM in 2011 announced that they were going to set up a nanotechnology research center just outside of Zurich in Rüschlikon, together with ETH Zurich, which is the technical university in Switzerland, one of the best technical universities in Europe. $90 million over a 10-year period that they would use to conduct joint research into nanotechnology. So it is obvious that there are major benefits. However, when you talk to industry people, which we did, there are lots of problems. One would think that universities can really benefit by collaborating with industry because they get an additional stream of resources. They can get additional revenues from licensing. I'm talking about funding resources, licensing. For instance, Columbia University 2 years ago reported that their licensing revenue was about $200 million, which is not insignificant for a university, $200 million. Faculty and graduates or students are being exposed to cutting-edge themes and research and equipment as well. Plus, the university can actually contribute to making the world a better place. And so, but that's the theory. The reality is that working together with industry does not come easy to many academics. And I'm not talking necessarily about the business schools. Those are used to interacting with industry. I'm talking about the science departments, about those where the major advancements in terms of techniques or sciences or nanotechnologies are taking place. And so what we face is a major cultural divide that needs to be bridged in order for the university-industry collaboration to work. And that divide is different values. You know, many academics still think if they work together with industry, it comes with strings attached. They want to maintain their freedom of speech. They're afraid of that. They have different agendas, the publication pressure and publication ambition on the one hand versus producing products that actually sell in the marketplace. We look at different management styles. Very few people are able to tell a tenured professor what to do. Yet if you think about management, it's very different. So you have an asymmetric relationship here. Then, of course, one of the themes that has come up just about in every presentation this morning, IP. Who owns what? In order to paraphrase Sebastian, it's who owns what? And as you know, who owns what was no question prior to 1980 in the US. Prior to 1980, universities were proud or honored to be able to work together with companies. The companies would reap all the benefits and maybe offer some jobs to the graduates of the students and would come as speakers in the classroom. And the IP basically would move along with that transaction. In 1980, the Bayh-Dole Act was instituted. You're probably familiar with that. That means as soon as there's $1 federal involved in that research project, the university has the right over the IP and can regulate what's going to happen with the IP. And so this is obviously, and then they can sell that IP to companies. And what we know is that that IP is a contentious issue. That's probably one of the reasons why it has come up in just about every single presentation. These are some voices of people in the biotech industry that we have been talking with. These are the study that I'm going to briefly elaborate on is based on data from the chief scientists or the founders or the CEOs of those biotech companies. And so this is what they're saying. And in fact, I remember one GE executive saying, some universities have IP policies that are so restrictive that despite their great science, we're not going to partner with them. It's too restrictive for us. And so, and that GE person basically was echoing some of those situations here. And so this was sort of the background, or is sort of the background of that started out our research. We got to talk to several people. We conducted about 25 interviews just here in the country in order to better understand what are some of those issues that actually make or break that partnership. And I made a few notes earlier from the other presentations. And I'm just going to read some of the topics that came up. Collaboration, open innovation, right? Open innovation is the funnel that has holes in it on the side. That is sort of the thing that many would subscribe, that many would UICs or university industry collaborations subscribe to. A lack of resources, research resources, that is, in many companies. Who owns what? I already mentioned that. Strategic relationships, co-location, and the like. These are all themes that actually came up in our study. And so when talking with people experienced with those industry collaborations, what are some of the make or break things? What do you think came up first? It has come up as well early in one of those presentations. It's the trust. It's not the IP. It's the trust between the parties involved, the trust between the team on the industry team, the industry researchers, and the academic researchers, not to be taken advantage of. If you remember that second statement, it may actually not be the university that takes advantage of us, but participants in the research who find out where the direction the research is heading. So there are some issues. There are some lawsuits out there. One was recently settled with the University of Pennsylvania exactly about that issue. But it's the trust in the mutual trust between those partners. And trust basically only exists under conditions of risk. And so under conditions of risk, you have to make yourself vulnerable, so to speak. There's always an uncertainty factor. And contracts cannot reduce the risk of opportunism, for instance, or someone cheating on us. And so the next question was, so what drives trust? We know that IP, intellectual property policies, are a given. Any university these days in the US has intellectual property policies, Office of Sponsored Research. I believe we are in a building that is that houses the technology transfer office, or used to house the technology transfer office. And they all have their regulations and contracts that they show to the industry candidate that wants to partner with them, and tell them these are the terms. And if you sign, we're fine. If not, then we'll find someone else. And so those IP policies have become, as I mentioned earlier, are one of those issues that can contribute to trust, but they can also decrease trust in that relationship. So as it is a given, the question is, how can you formulate those IP policies for them to work? And so we have that contractual component, on the one hand, the contractual governance mechanism that drives, that facilitates trust, and then we also have what we call a relational component. The relational component is, and we learned that along the way, has to do with co-location, has to do with constant interaction between the parties. Co-location means that a Hewlett-Packard researcher is in fact in the computer science department working. It means that a biochemist is working in MIT's biochemistry department or in Northeastern biochemistry's department. It is to better understand, to meet each other. It means that General Motors would fly into Providence once a week to meet with the professor and his team who received $5 million for software development. And once a month, the professor and parts of his team would fly to Detroit to meet with the management at General Electric, just to make sure that they're on the same page. So it requires a lot of effort, but that is not enough. What it also takes, and that is what we learned from in several interviews, is a person that is willing to, basically become a frequent flyer, spend 150,000 miles a year on the plane to shuttle back and forth between the universities and the headquarters, just to make sure that that collaboration is actually running to fight fires, to mend fences, to secure top management support, to convince the scientist team that the research in the university is actually a good one, interesting one, cutting edge one, as compared to the notion that it may not actually advance their agenda. And then at the end of the day, of course, why did you rob the bank? Well, because that's where the money is. So what is the link between trust, the outcome actually, and trust in university-industry collaborations? So that needs to, as I said at the beginning, this is an important finding from others that said that many of those collaborations don't pay. Or, as we had a speaker last week, Gloria and I were at an innovation summit in Richmond, in Virginia. As the speaker said, it's very hard to calculate and it takes forever to work. It's very hard to calculate the outcome, and it takes forever to work with a university to even come up with the agreement. You know, if it takes 6 months to come up with an agreement, the project might already have been conducted before it actually sees the light of the day. And so the projects that we are looking at, that we are having in our data, are between, the majority of those are in between 28 and 38 months in length. There are some much longer ones and very few shorter ones. So the frame of reference is this one here. Very simple. We said, okay, what if we identify those variables that make or break the project, which are these, and then let's test for, collect data and test for some, make some statistical tests. So IP policies, if they're formulated right, and that means they need to be transparent, they need to be flexible, they need to be equitable. So in terms of royalty sharing, for instance, licensing fees for both parties, not only for the university. It used to be very asymmetrical. Then it would facilitate trust. Shared governance, on the other hand, is what I just described, is working together with the team in order to develop that interaction. And university industry champions are those that facilitate, that mend fences, that facilitate problems and issues. And trust is related to knowledge transfer and innovation. So we did a survey with 660 US dedicated biotech firms, hardcore biotech, not beer brewers, into those variables. And what we found was mostly the information that we got, validation of the information that we had seen in our interviews, but with a statistically significant finding. So the conclusions are that while research-oriented firms are really concerned about IP, those concerns can be alleviated if the university is willing to adjust those IP policies, equitable, fair, transparent. So they need to be flexible. There's no one-size-fits-all. And the active participation in that research project is paramount by the industry partner, by both, in order to make it a success and ultimately produce successful outcomes. Thank you very much.